Hey guys, in this tutorial we will see mouse selection of entities. Till assignment 5 you have seen tab selection. To do mouse selection, let's go to selection manager script. Here you should have these lines of code which checks for whether tab is pressed or not, and if tab is pressed then select next entity function is called, which select the next entity. Now in the mouse selection, what we do, these lines of code will do mouse selection. Similar to Ogre, where we did mouse selection using Raycast, in the Unity as well we will do mouse selection using Raycast. So first we need to Raycast and then find the point of intersection on the plane, and then we will check whether there is any entity within certain radius from that point of intersection. If there is one entity, then that entity will be selected. If there is more than one entity, then the closest entity will be selected. Now we'll start from here. Raycast hit. This is just Raycast hit type. Then we will check whether mouse is pressed or not with this input dot get mouse button down, and then we will draw a raycast with this here, physics.raycast, that takes input argument as camera.main screen point to ray with the camera position, out hit, which is the raycast hit, and mathf.infinity means the distance, how far you want to do a raycast. Now what this will do, what this line will do, this line will point a raycast from the camera, and if that raycast intersect with the plane, then this hit dot point will give that 3D location, the 3D intersection location. Now I have a global variable called intersection point, which I have defined here, initialized to 0, but we will get this point after the raycast. Now I have one 3D location and I have a list of entities in the entity manager. I'll iterate over list of entities to check whether the distance between the location of the entity and this intersection point is less than certain value or not. I'm checking that value as a radius, which I have defined here, let's say 50. Now if the distance between the intersection point and the location of entity is less than this value, radius, which is 50, then I will store the ID of that particular entity into a list, which is here, IDs. IDs is a list of type int. I have initialized it here. Here I am going to store all the index value of the entity which is inside this radius. Now at the end of this for loop, what I'll get a list of entities within certain radius from point of intersection. Now if there is only one entity, then what we will do, we will select that particular entity. If there is no entity, that means this ID's size is 0, in that case the default selection is 0, which is here. By default, entity at 0th index is selected, and if we do not find any entity within a certain radius from the point of intersection, then the default will be 0. That means entity at 0th index will be selected always. But if we have more than one entity, then we need to find the closest entity. To find the closest entity, we will call this function find closest entity, that takes one input argument, which is a 3D location, which is the point of intersection. Now if we look at this function, what this function does, this function returns the ID of the closest entity from the point of intersection. Once we have the ID of the closest entity from the point of intersection, that means we get the closest entity. Now we want to select this closest entity. To do that, we call another function called select closest entity, that takes one input argument, which is the ID of the entity that needs to be selected. If we look at this function, the closest entity, this is the ID of the entity that we want to select. We have defined an entity 381 type variable here called selected entity. We will get the selected entity from the list of entities, and the list of entities is in the entity manager. Now from here we select this entity and set its selected boolean true. Now when this its selected boolean true, then what will happen in the control manager, in the update function of the control manager, here we can perform all the operations on that particular selected entity. Now this code is exactly same as you have in your assignment 5. Now once you have selected an entity through mouse selection, to show that which entity is selected, we will have a new script called selector. Here in the selector, we have these codes. These codes will help us to see whether a particular entity is selected or not. Before coming here, let's go to Unity editor. In the Unity editor, look at this movable entities. I have two ships, DDG51 and tugboat. The DDG51 has one game object called decoration, and inside this I have this selection cylinder. Now this selection cylinder, you can see here in the scene view, is this green circle. Now I can turn on and turn off this selection cylinder with mouse to show that at any given time this particular entity is selected. This selector script does exactly the same thing. Now in the entity manager, in the entity 381, you all have entity 381. There is one more variable of type game object, public game object, selection circle. Now if we go back to Unity editor and see entity 381 attached to each ship, I can see here the selection circle. In this selection circle, I am going to drag and drop this selection cylinder, and with the script I'm going to turn on and turn off this selection cylinder to show that this is selected or not. Similarly, with the tugboat in the entity 381, there is selection cylinder and this is attached here, and with this script I'm going to turn on and turn off this. Now let's go back to the script. In the update function, this line of code does the mouse selection. Now let's see this running in the editor. Let's hit play. So we see a circle around DDG51. This DDG51 is by default selected. Look at this public int selected entity index, which is 0. Now let's say we want to select tugboat. We click on top of tugboat and we have tugboat selected with mouse. Now if we want to select again DG51, let's select near to DG51 and we have this DG51 selected. Now remember, to do Raycast we need to have a box collider with each entity we have. So with the DGG51 I have attached a box collider, and with tugboat I have attached a box collider. Also I attached a box collider with the ocean as well. That means if I click anywhere on the ocean, I should get an intersection point. So with this way we can select and perform any operation on the selected entity. Let's move this ship. Let's turn it left. Next, let's select tugboat. Let's move it to the right. Okay, so in this tutorial we have seen how to do mouse selection. Thank you.